Hello everyone. Today I'm bringing you the entire Ward series from beginning to end. This is a series I started when I pretty much first started my channel, so you're going to kind of hear the evolution of my recording skills, I guess. So I apologize for any audio inconsistencies, but this has been my first series I've done on my channel, and it's definitely been a journey. And I thank the author so much for giving me permission to narrate his series, and it's been wonderful to work with him. Everything you need to know about him is linked in the description, as well as a little interview that we did together a while back, so thank you so much. His name is Ghetto Ceratops on Reddit, so if you want to ever check him out. And without further ado, here is the entire Ward series. Thank you guys so much and enjoy. Now, let's get creepy. I work at a mental hospital in Louisville, Kentucky, and my friend finally convinced me to post some of my experiences on here. You may recognize some bits and pieces of these stories from my work in a couple horror anthologies, as I use a lot of my day-to-day situations as inspiration for my writing. I also want to say to please not message me asking if these are true or not. If you don't want to believe them, I hope you at least found some entertainment value in my stories. Also, all names given have been changed, so with that out of the way. Most of my day consists of making sure people aren't hurting themselves or each other. All that shit you see on TV with asylums is completely obtuse and frankly stigmatizing. We take care of all of our patients to the best of our ability. We wouldn't be going through all the stress of this line of work if we didn't at least kind of care. That being said, there are times when we have to be a bit more forceful with our less stable patients. But again, it is nothing like what you see on TV. Most of the time, you can just talk patients down. Even violent ones rarely need sedation. Other times, you just have to respect the rituals they have built for themselves to stay stable. It's all about empathy and seeing the humanity left in them. Since I had started about 11 years back, I had always been good friends with a patient that we will call Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson had a nasty combination of multiple personality disorder, Alzheimer's, and severe depression. But with medication and the hospital's structured nature, he managed to find a little peace. Since day one, Mr. Johnson would wait for me in the rec room and ask me to play checkers and proceed to wipe the goddamn floor with me. Here is this tiny, forgetful old man just busting my ass at checkers like he's some kind of checkers world champion. Turns out, he is. My boss got a big kick out of it because everyone else apparently knew this and were a little hesitant to go toe-to-toe with Mr. Johnson. Oh, and did I mention? Mr. Johnson forgot nigh everything from the day before when he woke up in the morning. This resulted in a checkers competition bracket that looked more like a Mobius strip with two contenders than anything else. Every day he would convince me to play, and every day he would squash me like a cockroach. Once he was done handing me my ass, he would just look at me with his big brown bloodhound eyes and say, "Hey, good job, sport." This went on for 2.5 years. Walk in, play checkers, lose. "Hey, good job, sport." Rinse and repeat. One day was different though. I came in, sat down at our usual spot, and commenced the game. He was noticeably off though, kind of jittery and weak looking. He said he felt alright, said he took all of his medication, said he ate breakfast. Check, check, and check. I'm kind of in this meditative zone after a while. The board kind of gets hypnotic when you play for so long. Before I even realize it, the board is empty save for one red piece. I had won. I had beat Mr. Johnson with only one piece to spare. I'm glad I was in a mental hospital because I about lost my mind. It was exhilarating, and I look up at his face with this big dumb smile. He just says, "Hey, good job, sport." Then he walks away to his room. My heart sinks down to my stomach when I see him go, and I feel like some cruel, sick son of a bitch. Honestly, I was kind of lost. I felt like I needed to apologize. I was too awkward about it though, and what was I supposed to say? Yo, sorry for beating you at the one thing you were good at, Gramps. Sucks to suck? I worked the rest of the day in a slump. I kind of hide around corners checking for Mr. Johnson because I'm scared to face him. It's almost time for me to leave, and I know I won't be able to sleep if I don't at least say something to him. I head to his room and peek in the door. There is blood everywhere, but not splatters, not huge puddles. There were squares of blood in a checkered pattern on the floor. In the middle of the room was Mr. Johnson, face first on the ground, his finger outstretched like he was tracing something. Beside the checkered pattern was a message written in this poor guy's own blood. The first bit was too messy to read, but I could make out the last word. Sport. I don't really feel like I need to go into any more detail about it, but I will say that I learned later on that he, in reality, had taken another patient's medication, which may have led him to do that to himself. After the cleanup was done, all we find on him is this shard of glass from a window we suspect he had broken in an empty patient's room and a pocket full of red checker pieces. I help the other employees clean up and scrub down everything, and I'm quick to wash away the sloppy sentence he had scribbled down with his finger. I shouldn't have done that. I realize that now. I really should have mentioned it to someone, but admitting what had happened to anyone else would mean admitting it to myself. I wasn't ready for that then. It's late when I get home, around 2 a.m. or so. I had spent the last couple of hours filing some paperwork since I was the one to find Mr. Johnson. I unlock the door to my house and step inside. On the floor in front of me, about 4 feet from the entryway, is a single black checker piece. There is no blood, no sign of forced entry, no sign of any kind of entry for that matter. I thought the games were over when we found him there, cold and dead, but I guess I was wrong. He had one more game to play, and Mr. Johnson had won, with 1 piece to spare. I have never told anyone this story, and I don't plan to ever tell it again. Another time, about 2 weeks ago, I was down in our basement at the hospital. It's not officially the basement that we use for patients. It's actually a vestige of old hospital before it was remodeled about 25 years ago. I guess the renovation crews couldn't tear up this part without compromising the foundation or something. Currently, we use it as a glorified supply closet, but the rooms used to be used for solitary confinement up until people realized that was a fucked up thing to do to anyone, sane or not. I'm down there looking for some extra gloves to restock a medical room for a technician. Now, we always keep the door to that part of the basement locked, so no wandering feet accidentally go down there and get hurt. And anyone who wants to get in has to get the keys from my boss's office. I get the ring of keys and pop open the lock to the basement. I actually always liked going into the dungeon, as some people referred to it. It felt like this little secret grotto that I could retreat to if I needed to take a breather. The light fixtures still use screw-in bulbs, like the humming halogen bulbs we used to illuminate the rest of the hospital. So I'm heading down the tiled steps, getting into the sharp rhythm the clicks of my heels make as they echo deeper into the dungeon. The sound always reminds me of those cheap clacker toys with the 2 balls at the end of a piece of a cord, and you can pull it up and down to make the balls clank together. It's a weird kind of nostalgia, I'll admit, but I'm a sap. I'm taking my time getting to the bottom of the stairs and whistling a little melody I have had stuck in my head forever. Anyway, I get to the bottom and make a left into the first of 4 cells, where we have built some uneven shelves to hold things like toiletries and cleaning products. Each of the doors still had their original locking mechanisms on them, complete with the iconic keyhole shape cut right into them on the outside. We always joked with the volunteers to be careful not to get locked down there, or else they could be trapped for who knows how long, though the locks only operated from the outside and no one ever found the original keys. We don't make those jokes anymore. I am filling up a milk crate with boxes of latex gloves and some hand sanitizer when I hear something come from outside the cell. It sounds something like sandpaper scratching against stone or those plastic eggs filled with rice that preschoolers shake. It's just this abrasive scraping sound is what I'm trying to say. I pop my head outside and ask if anyone is there. There isn't, but now that I'm outside, I can hear it coming from the cell across from the one I had just been in. The first thought that crosses my mind is that maybe a patient somehow got down there, but when I grab the handle, I realize the fucking door is locked. It's fucking locked. From there, I can hear someone on the other side scraping against the door. I tell them I'm going to get help and I book it for the stairs. I'm about halfway up when I hear a pop. I whip my head around to see that one of the bulbs had blown, then another, and another. One by one the bulbs go out, and I'm running like I've never ran before in my whole damn life. I get to the top just as the last bulb blinks out. In the dark, I throw my hands for the knob, but I can't feel anything. I'm running my hands all along the face of the door, but I swear I can't find anything. It's just like a smooth wall. I start screaming. Before long, the door flies open and I see my coworker Dana standing there all panicked. "What the hell are you screaming for?" But I don't know how to articulate it. I must have looked like a clown, throwing my hands around and babbling. Eventually, I manage to get out that I think someone is trapped in one of the cells. Then, both of us go to my boss, who calls our repairman. He doesn't answer. So we call my boss's boss, who calls a locksmith who says his tools won't work on locks that old. Yeah, like, what the fuck? He calls a mechanic that he knows, and that mechanic brings a plasma torch to cut off the lock. When all is said and done, Dana, my boss's boss, another volunteer, the mechanic, and I are all standing around this red-hot hole in the metal door, flashlights in hand. My boss punches the door open and says, in not too professional words, what she plans to do to our repairman when she gets a hold of him. She couldn't have known how soon that might be. The door hits the wall behind it, and there he is, the repairman. He is huddled in the corner in the fetal position. His skin is leathery and gray, and he has this thick coat of dust on his back like he had been there for months. My boss is staring at me like it was some kind of joke, but I know what I heard. I tell her that, but she is speechless. She clears everyone out and tells me to go home. I figure out a couple days later that they had an autopsy done on the body. His report said that he died from malnourishment and must have been down there for a minimum of 6 months. Yet, he had been to the hospital to repair some windows not 3 days before. Even stranger was what they found inside the body. In his stomach, perfectly clean and shiny, was a ring of 4 vintage keys. We still don't know if they went to those doors because my boss had replaced all of them the day after we found him. But even if they did fit those locks, I had no clue how he would have engaged them from the outside. The hospital got fined pretty heftily, and I assumed I was going to lose my job. My boss must have felt bad for me or something because I still work here. In fact, I am working even more than usual since she had to lay off a couple of less seniored employees. I used to have 2 bosses here at the hospital, but I lost one 2 winters ago. My ward is always usually busy around Christmas time. We admit a lot of patients with severe depression and thoughts of suicide or self-harm. It's pretty bleak, frankly, despite the amount of work I have to keep me busy. A big thing we always have to tell new volunteers is not to let that dark energy get in your head. Honestly, I have seen it break people. That winter was particularly bad, though, considering the day after Thanksgiving, we found a suicide victim laying out in the bushes in front of our facility. What's worse is that another patient found them. Word spread quickly from patient to patient, leaving a dark cloud hanging over the ward for the rest of the season. It was manageable, but just barely. Anyway, we survived through December and most of January, but as anyone who lives in Kentucky can tell you, winter doesn't show up until late January. It hit us hard. Ice and snow, downed power lines and car wrecks, closed interstates and unsalted roads. Eventually, they call a state of emergency, and most of the employees, including myself, are sleeping in spare rooms or on cots in any secluded area they could find. I had not left the hospital in 3 days, and I could see everyone was on the verge of an emotional break. A nurse, we will call him Mark, who happened to be visiting from Hong Kong, managed to get caught up in this whole affair. We soon became pretty good friends, seeing how I grew up in China and still knew quite a bit of Mandarin. Other than me, the staff didn't talk to him much until he started offering us Adderall. I never took any, but some of the employees and volunteers had rather stay awake, keeping themselves busy, than try to fall asleep alone, wishing they were back home with their families. I figured out later that my bosses knew about the Adderall, but they were just barely hanging on as it was. The 2 of them slept in shifts, never interacting save to wake the other up. I guess they just assumed the other would take care of things with Mark. Maybe not. Either way, no one took care of things with Mark. At first, I guess he was distributing from his own personal supply, but soon moved to stealing from the hospital to get people their uppers. Just really quick, let me make it clear that I had no idea that he was stealing from our hospital. Giving people a little bump was questionable already, but I figured it was better than having everyone exhausted and useless. I only learned half of this stuff after the fact. Anyway, it was the morning of my 4th day there, and Mark and I were eating some toast on a couch in the lobby. I can remember clearly him telling me how salty American food was as he looked at his over-buttered piece of toast. I laugh when he asks me how I managed to stave off the American obesity epidemic. I stop when the power goes out. The rest of the story I actually heard from Mark, as I was busy relocating patients to a different wing of the ward that had power still. He tells me that they have him up in the office with my boss, phones blitzing different officials at the power company, seeing if there is anything they can do. When a volunteer named Maggie comes in, not so discreetly, asking for Adderall, Mark plays it off like he has no idea what she is talking about, and I guess that made her angry. All this escalates into a fight, and my boss gives her a pretty serious tongue lashing and sends her out of the room. According to Mark, she seemed abnormally agitated, but he wrote it off as stress.
She had probably been up for 3 days straight. The last thing she needed was to be awake for any longer,
he said. Things are pretty quiet once the orderlies find a way to settle down the patients. We have some of them come into the common area, and our janitor starts playing Christmas songs on this old piano we have. It was actually kind of beautiful in a way, even though I could only hear it echoing through the halls as I shifted patients to new rooms. Mark had moved out there into the piano room to help corral group. Everything is going well until he sees Maggie grab one of the patients from the group and try to take them away. Mark catches her before she can take the patient away and asks her what she's doing. "Relock," she said. "They want all the schizophrenics moved." She then raises her eyebrows, glares at him, and calls him a prick. Mark was going to go with her, but some of the patients were trying to help play the piano. He managed to slip away to give my boss a heads up about how weird Maggie was being once the piano ordeal was dealt with. He can't find my boss or Maggie anywhere, but he sure as hell found the patient. He was lying on the floor, naked, hands burnt in some places to the bone, and quietly crying the same phrase over and over.
I didn't know. I didn't know. I didn't know.
Mark says he could smell the scent of burnt hair from inside the room behind the patient. He tries to pick the poor man up off the floor, but he just screams and claws at Mark's face before scrambling into the room. Mark steps inside the room. Mark can see the patient's bed is occupied. Mark can see our boss tied to the bedpost with purple shoelaces. Her arms are scarred up with burns in the shape of what looks like constellations, a series of dots connected with thin lines. Mark scrambles to her side and notices her head has been shaved as well. Beside her are a straightened metal coat hanger, a Bic lighter, and an empty bottle of Ambien. The patient with the burnt palms, in Mark's words,
traced out the constellations with his shaking fingers. He was still crying and repeated that phrase, I didn't know, over and over. I'm freaking out, but I didn't want to freak him out any more than he already is. I just tell him we need to go, that there are some more songs he can listen to in the other room. He just stops and looks up at me with these big, desperate eyes that I can barely even make out in the light from the one window in the room. He holds up his hands, all blistered and fries, and says, No, 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 I didn't know. I ask him what he didn't know. He looks around like he is checking to make sure no one is listening, then points under the bed. He was already here. Then he shuffles over to the corner, curls up, and falls asleep.
Mark stays in the room and immediately starts calling for help while he unties our boss. He says she is barely breathing, that her eyes are lolling around in her head, and she won't respond to stimuli. I guess some nurses finally show up, but Mark says they are so freaked that they won't even touch her at first. He ultimately has to throw her in a wheelchair himself before they will cart her off. When she is out of the room, he goes to the patient in the corner, but he is stopped when he sees something under the bed. He claims he saw a glowing aura under the bed, so faint he could barely even make it out. The glow sat right in this hole that had been broken up in the floor. He crawled over to the bed, and once he is a bit closer, can see that the hole is about halfway filled with this very fine gray powder.
It smelled like when someone just lights a match. I don't know why I would even do this, but I reach out my hand to touch the powder. It's not even warm around the hole. As soon as I make contact with it, though, it burns like all hell. Seriously, I thought I was going to pass out. I pull back my hand and my damn fingerprints are melted off.
I can also confirm this. He showed me his hands later on in the night. Not 10 seconds later, the power comes on. Mark turns around to get the patient, but he is already up. In fact, he is standing right behind Mark, almost touching him, staring wide-eyed at the bed.
He's just standing there. I can see tears start to well up in his eyes. Did you do this? I made the nest. The hole? No, the nest. He wouldn't say anything after that, so I get him out of the room to get him some help. He takes one step out the door, and it's like all the pain from his hands hits him at once. He screams like he is being skinned and passes out. I have to drag him most of the way to a medical room before someone sees us and brings me a wheelchair for him.
Later on, Mark shows me the hole under the bed. There is no powder though, but the room did smell like something was burnt in it. It looked sort of like it had been chiseled out with a small instrument like a kitchen knife or something. There is a huge investigation the next couple of days, as there is no sign of Maggie except for my boss's office that she trashed. The only thing the police think she took was the bottle of sleeping meds. Other than that, they find no evidence of Maggie even being there. That boss was gone for almost 2 months after that, and when she does come back, it's as a patient. She comes in with a walker, still completely bald, and with burns that look like they were made moments before she arrived. I remember seeing the scarred system of dots and dashes forming peculiar shapes. I recognize one of the shapes as Capricorn, and another as Orion. I take care of her now. She is in room 202, on the same floor as the room with the hole. I tried to get that changed, thinking it might be traumatic for her or something, but it seems like she likes it. A woman who used to run this place now can't even articulate a coherent sentence. Except one. I'll walk her around the floor during the day because she can't get much more exercise than that in her state. When she passes the room with the hole, she stares at it like it's an old friend, then looks to me with a smile. Has it hatched? Firstly, I would like to apologize again for the re-upload of The Ward Part 2. This is why you may have received a notification update about the status of The Ward series that I am doing. In an attempt to correct some grammar errors, I slipped up and accidentally deleted it, which, to be honest, may be how it should have stayed. But secondly, I received a PM shortly after posting it for the first time. If anyone has any info on this user, message, anything, I would be really relieved and grateful. The message was from a user, Silver Magnus, a user I cannot find upon searching for them anywhere, and was written as follows.
I have been reading your The Ward series, and I, along with some others, are not happy with your postings. Take this however you would like. But this is your one and only warning not to delve any deeper into the topic matter detailed in The Ward. We also demand for immediate removal of both Part 1 and Part 2. Again, this is your only warning, Mr.
My name, my address. Signed,
Silver Magnus.
I am not too familiar with Reddit yet, especially the subreddit No Sleep. But as far as I know, Silver Magnus is not a moderator. I don't understand what kind of infraction I have made or how they figured out my address. Silver Magnus, if you are reading this, which I assume you are, I take threats like this very seriously, but I will not stop posting, especially since it seems like you are trying to keep something hidden. To everyone else, I thank you for all of your kind words. It's hard keeping all of these experiences internalized because I feel like no one would understand or care. I really don't know what would spark this kind of message, but somehow I feel like it is connected to that hole in room 230. I haven't really worried so much about it since the day of the power outage. Now though, when I passed it up today, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. I seriously doubt I will be taking my boss for any more walks past that part of the hallway. Something just feels different now. I don't know what it is. It just makes me get a sense of foreboding. On the other hand, I may just be paranoid or overreacting. Or both. If this is some kind of joke, a sort of sick roleplay, I don't find it funny. My work is stressful enough as it is, and the last thing I need on my mind is thinking about someone stalking me. If anyone thinks it may just be better to stop posting, I can do so. But I would rather keep being transparent, telling my stories as needed. I promise to keep you all posted on everything that transpires, but I want to be as careful as possible with how I proceed to do so. I'm going to try to talk to Mark sometime this week about everything, as I mentioned before in the comments. Please let me know if there is anything you want me to ask him. Finally, a strange development has occurred, one that I find far too convenient to be mere chance. I was about to punch out for the day, and I just happened to look through the room list. It's basically an Excel spreadsheet with room numbers and patient names, along with specific notes on that room or patient. I noticed that the patient currently admitted in room 230 was being discharged. Most of the time, seeing a discharge notice is a happy occasion, but the patient in room 230 suffers from severe psychopathy. It's not something that just gets better. We fully expected for her to spend the rest of her life in here. In fact, just last Sunday, we found her dismembering a bird that she managed to catch outside. She weaved all the plucked feathers in her hair and proceeded to eat the meat off the poor thing. Alive. That is the kind of mental illness we are dealing with here, and they are discharging her. I asked around, and either everyone was playing dumb or really didn't know why she was leaving. I asked my boss. She just says that the patient has fulfilled all of the requirements to be discharged. There isn't much we can do. They want to move her out this Saturday. I'm livid by that point, and proceed to politely remind my boss about the bird incident. She just shrugs and asks me not to worry about it. I do worry about it, though. I dash to room 230 and look through the little window to the patient's room. I see her just sitting in the bed, facing the wall. Something is off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Then I notice it. Dust. She has fine gray dust powdering her arms, just like the powder Mark had described. I head into her room and ask her how she did that to herself. She does nothing, just blankly stares at the wall some more. I crane my neck to look under the bed. The hole was back, and it was full of gray chalky powder. When I look back up, the patient is smiling from ear to ear at me. We had filled that hole with concrete after the first incident, but it was back now. I tell the janitor, and he says he will get on it. Besides him, though, I don't say another word about it to anyone. Something is going on here, and I'm going to get to the bottom of it. Sorry for not posting in a couple weeks. Things have been kind of crazy on my end, mostly with work and the holidays. I will say that along with this story, I also have some relieving news. So far, any and all threatening PMs have ceased. Perhaps it was just some sort of joke, but I do really appreciate everyone's words of kindness and concern on my behalf. Anyway, in light of the holiday season, I have a Christmas story for you all. As I have stated before, the holidays can be a bit bleak at the hospital, but our yearly gift exchange is always the highlight of my winter. Usually we stress participants to make something in one of our art classes, but gag gifts are welcome as well, within reason. Because a lot of our participants don't receive visitors, these gifts may be the only thing they receive that year. It is honestly really heartwarming to see the tender care put into those gifts, even the silly ones. There are times when presents get out of hand, though. One year in particular, we had to reject a couple of gifts, much to the displeasure of the giver. You see, all of the presents have to be approved by an employee or volunteer to avoid any awkward or dangerous situations. Though it is uncommon for us to turn stuff away, one gift, in particular, sticks out in my mind. I was going through the list of gift reviews for that day, making pretty good time and enjoying seeing the little crafts or letters. I can remember being almost finished with my list when I popped my head into Eddie's room. Eddie is one of our more dependent patients, as he suffers from autism, Tourette's, and a few other minor disorders that make him a bit unpredictable at times. Eddie is nonverbal, and when I enter the room, he signs,
Hello.
I sign back, Hello, Eddie. Make Christmas present?
Yes, I make a Christmas present.
I see present?
No.
No? He puts his hands over his pillow that is laying on the bed beside him, looking guiltily away from me. Present in pillow? I sign with a smile, but he doesn't answer. Everything okay, Eddie? Present is for who?
Emily.
Emily last name?
Not no.
I run over all the Emilys that I can think of that either work or are admitted into our ward, but none of them seem to be the one he is thinking of. This happens a lot with Eddie. He gets confused and flustered kind of easily, but with a bit of patience and prodding, he can usually wind up articulating what he needs to. He is really a thoughtful guy, to be honest. Sometimes I feel like I'm one of the only people that give him the time of day. I figure that I will give him a little space to think, and circle back to him after I finish up the rest of my list. I come back, okay? Can I know what present is? You show me later? He thinks for a while.
Necklace.
Necklace! Very thoughtful, Eddie. See you soon. I finish my list without any issue, and start helping a volunteer with some paperwork before heading back to Eddie's room. I'm not surprised when I don't find him there, as most of the patients would be eating dinner around that time. I take the opportunity to do some cursory snooping to find his present, and it's not long before I find an empty trash bag stuffed inside his pillowcase. Through the black plastic bag, I can see some thick colored material that had been knotted up. I loosen up the drawstring at the top of the bag and peer into the open mouth. Inside, coiled and skillfully tied, is a noose made from a long orange extension cord. It's old and worn to the wire in some places, like the cables found in the maintenance closets in the dungeon. The noose has been wound up and tied off with ribbons and a bow, and attached to the bow is a small folded piece of college-ruled paper. I nervously fish the loop out of the bag and retrieve the note. I can see black ink bleeding through the cheap stationery. Even stranger than the noose was that letter. For all we knew, Eddie couldn't write anything more than a clumsy assortment of glyphs that vaguely resembled his name. I unfolded the note, looking at the carefully scrawled message. I barely have time to read or comprehend the contents of the letter when I hear the door open behind me. It's Eddie. He looks confused and a little hurt. I fumble to get the noose back into the bag to free up my hands to sign, but he beats me to the first word.
Why you open?
He asks. I need open. Hospital rules. You know that. He frowns.
It's surprise.
I point to the bag and he nods. I manage to muster up a stern face. Who gave this to you?
No one.
No lies. Need to know. This is no good, Eddie. Who?
No one.
Who made? Nurse? Patient?
Patient.
Did Emily make it?
No. Present for Emily.
Who make? His eyes are darting between me and the bag, and I can see his fingers flitting uncomfortably.
I make.
I'm stunned. My fingers feel like they are going to tie themselves in a knot as I try to pick what to say next. The only thing I can manage to get out is, You make? He nods. And you write the note?
Yes, Emily taught me.
Who's Emily, Eddie?
Girl.
Patient? Nurse? He signs no twice. Family? No again. By then, I am stumped, and I definitely don't believe that he did all of this on his own. Eddie wasn't one to lie, though. In fact, until that day, I couldn't have told you a single lie to come out of his hands. He asked me then if I planned on taking the present away. I tell him that I did, but that doesn't seem like the answer he had been looking for. He gives me this sincerely confused grimace. I tell him that his present is dangerous, and that someone might get hurt with it. He gestures a ring around his neck with his pointer finger, and I nod. I can see the cogs turning in his brain and his eyes darting around the room. After a long silence, he looks up at me and furrows his brow across his bright green eyes.
Did Emily hurt Emily with necklace?
I ask him to repeat his sentence, having fallen even deeper into the depths of my confusion. He repeats, but I'm still baffled. Who is Emily, Eddie? What's she look like?
I not know.
I ask him what her face looks like, her eye color, her hair, anything to help me figure out who the hell he is talking about. Still, he says he doesn't have a clue, and I'll never, for as long as I live, forget what he signs next.
Never see face. Emily face always behind back when Emily in room.
I snatch up the bag and tell one of our volunteers to bring me some charms and string from the craft closet. That night, after retrieving the note and disposing of the old extension cord, Eddie and I made a new necklace for Emily from the supplies I had gathered. It turned out really pretty, actually. I even brought him a small jewelry box to put it in. We set the box on his windowsill, and I slid the letter he had written underneath the tiny parcel. In the morning, the package was nowhere to be found, but the note was still there, right where he had left it. The note read,
Emily, sorry your necklace broke. I made you a new one. Merry Christmas. Eddie.
Mother Mary of Endless Patience, our sister ward, closed down 2 months ago, and most of the patients there have been relocated to where I work. Needless to say, things are packed. Tightly. Like maximum capacity tight. Like check the fire code regulation tight. Like the city of Louisville will require a safety audit on the entire facility and staff body tight. We are still in the process of locating some patients to the right rooms, as many of them are required to have a roommate now. We are also having to staff up our cafeteria with some of the better patients after what we have been calling the meatball fiasco. All that being said, I have some new stories. I want to advise a bit of caution on this particular set, though. This first story is actually one I heard from my coworker Dana. She had come in on a Saturday shift to help the first batch of new patients from Endless Patience. Yeah, there's a joke in there somewhere. And it's important to mention here what Dana is like. First thing, most people notice how short she is. She's 4'10", maybe smaller by an inch or so. The second thing is how drop-dead, slap-your-mother, gorgeous she is. Long red hair, buxom, graceful as a damn Olympic figure skater. Skin like buttermilk. She's hot, okay? It's disgusting how beautiful she is. And just to nail this down, once we had a man admitted on cases of self-harm just so he would get to be at the same hospital with her. Turns out he was really a nut. So the hospital was a great fit for him, but we made sure to put him in the farthest wing from Dana as we could. The last thing about Dana is that she is sweeter than antifreeze. And just as dangerous, too. Dana loves every living thing she has ever seen, but her margin for dealing with fuckery or threats is essentially non-existent. Okay, so Dana is shepherding in all of the new patients, making small talk and other niceties, when she starts to notice none of the patients were wearing shoes. Well, they had shoes, but they were all piled up in the van without their laces. Then he comes out. A man we would soon be calling Sneakers. And, as Dana would put it, he looked nuttier than a cashew. He had these thick, bug-eye glasses with tortoiseshell frames. In his hands he had nearly 20 pairs of clinical white shoelaces. Dana laughs it off and asks for the laces, which he happily gives back, only to produce another handful from his bulging pockets. He runs the strings through his fingers in this really thoughtful way, like he is concentrating on some feat of mental dexterity. Every once in a while he smiles and nods at his work, only to continue arranging the intricate web of laces into a form more suitable to his taste. Sneakers spent a lot of time on a sailboat after he got out of the Navy. According to his family, he sailed all the way across the Pacific by himself, though After that trip, he was never really the same. His brother said that maybe the sun fried his brain or something. No one is really quite sure, but we all think he developed this fixation from having to deal with rigging all day. People do that kind of thing. When they start to slip, they turn to something they know they can control. This coping mechanism is fine, and in fact, studies have found that these obsessions can be some of the strongest bonds to recovery of a patient. So, Sneakers got his laces, and Dana made sure he didn't hurt himself with them. Come to find out, it wasn't just laces, but anything with that sort of stringy property. Spaghetti, yarn, rope, cables, you name it, he had it. Dana isn't one to question the motivations of the mentally unstable, but she was fascinated by Sneakers. It was all she ever wanted to talk about. So one day, she cracks and asks him why he's lacing together all of that string. According to Dana, he put his hand on her hand and stares at her with the clearest, most conscious eyes she has ever seen. All he says is,
"To protect you, Dana."
Now, this would freak me out, but not Dana. She still acts like it was the sweetest thing anyone has ever told her. With some further questions, she figures out rather simply that Sneakers is constructing a net. Must be a big net, Dana states.
"Gotta have a big net for big fish."
Sneakers replies. "Ah, so you're fishing?"
"Something like that."
After their conversation, Sneakers continues to weave his net for the next couple of days. Nothing out of the ordinary. But one day, he just stops. He tells Dana that he is finished and that the net is ready. Dana jokingly acts relieved and says that she feels much more protected now that the net is complete. Sneakers was beaming that day. He acted like a hero, and Dana loved it. She loves seeing her patients do well. Sneakers' light mood didn't last for long, though. Progressively, he gets more and more somber. He stops talking to anyone except Dana, and when he is talking to her, the only thing he does is ask if she's okay. Of course she was. She made sure Sneakers knew she was just fine, but he didn't seem convinced. Then, he's gone. Just gone. His bed was made, his net was gone. All of his clothes were folded up and neatly stacked. He also left a note for Dana, but she still hasn't let me read it or know its contents. Dana lets our boss know that something must have happened to Sneakers, and we start a search of the entire grounds. Of course, I'm volunteered to check the dungeon, but Sneakers wasn't down there. Thank God. We did find him, though, and by we, I mean Dana. Would you like to guess where he was found? Seriously, I will give you a second to think about it. Guessed it yet? Room 230. When Dana found him, he had several puncture wounds in his chest, and he was lying on top of a mass all tangled up in his net. Thankfully, Sneakers was alive. His prey, however, was not. In his trap lay a massive dead deer. Its antlers were bloody and sharp. At a glance, it looked like a regular old white-tailed deer, except for the gray dust that powdered its coat. Oh yeah, and the third eye. Somehow, either Sneakers captured that deer and dragged it all the way up to 230 without anyone noticing, or I don't even know what an alternative would be to that. I mean, damn. The 3 eyes isn't even all of it either. Dana said that it had teeth like a shark, pointed and jagged. I never saw it, but the image alone terrifies me. Sneakers had to be taken to medical, and Dana got some time off work after an extensive meeting with our boss. In fact, she is still on vacation, but she should be back within the week. I'll pry for details then. Lastly, after the deer incident, I decided to go talk to Sneakers in medical. For 2 days, the doctors wouldn't let anyone into the room due to his erratic moods and violent outbursts. That didn't sound like Sneakers, though. He might have been a little cracked, so to speak, but he wasn't broken. On the 3rd day, I was allowed in, when no one was around and the nurses weren't watching his door. I fucked up, okay? I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have seen what I did. Tubes. Everywhere. Tubes connected Sneakers to a room full of machines and monitors. One of his arms clearly had the skin removed and replaced with skin grafts from his leg, which was wrapped in a leaking, bloody bandage. His other arm looked like it was being prepped for operation, an operation to remove the skin. Constellations, beautiful, intricate, familiar constellations were burnt into his arms, and the doctors, for one reason or another, wanted them off. Sneakers was under heavy sedation then, but even if he had been awake, I still don't know what I would have said. Where do you begin with something like that? This nervous itch was starting to set in the back of my skull, and I decided it was time to go. But before I leave, something catches my eye. It is a hazardous waste can in the corner of the room. I don't know how to say this. I don't even know why I did what I did. I threw on some gloves and started digging around until I found what I was looking for. I have it now. It's in a jar of salt water in my fridge. Sneakers, beautiful, starry skin. Sometimes before I go to bed, I set the jar on my nightstand and stare at the markings, like they are some kind of code. They are a message. I just want to know what is being said. I killed someone a couple days ago. Her name was Jenna Cooley, age 17. It would have been her birthday tomorrow if things wouldn't have went like they had. About 2 weeks ago, I got asked to come to Pennsylvania to give a talk on treatment for the mentally ill activist group, the Society for Humanity Over Treatment, SHOT for short. Or you might know them as the Society for Humanity in Intellectual Treatment, but they had to change the name. I guess the acronym wasn't as catchy. They are a foundation that advocates human rights for the mentally disabled and disturbed, especially with regards to treatment that may negatively affect the quality of life. Ever wonder why we don't do lobotomies when you have a headache? Or why we don't electrocute the demons out of your crazy uncle for his drinking problems? Thanks, SHOT. They wanted me to speak a couple times over the course of 14 days at a local community college, and I jumped at the chance to tell some of my stories in real life, especially since I assumed that's how they found me in the first place, my stories. I thought it would be an incredible experience. I thought I would get to network with some bright minds and maybe even find a cute guy to spend the week with. Well, all of those things are true. But was it worth it? While I was living it up, all expenses paid, on some crusty Dean's Grant money, do you think I ever would have imagined what I would do to take it all back? No, you don't. You're all a bunch of voyeurs, jerking off to the newest salacious crap of gossip you can slide your slimy eyes over to. Do you realize I get sex offers for these stories? Mostly from men with medical fetishes, but damn. I say someone killed themselves in a bloody passion, and you're already finding my message box to see if I want to see what it does to you. If I told you that a disabled man with a wife and kid cut off his own tongue with a pair of safety scissors, that would get you going, I'm sure. Or what if I told you I saw a woman stomp a cat to death with her bare feet? Hitting two demographics of weirdos with that one. So how about this? How does this make you feel? Did you know that making someone stand for a week straight will cause kidney and liver failure? After 2 weeks, you will die of the infection. Did you know that if your hostage refuses to eat, you can rectally infuse vitamins through an enema bag? Did you know that if you keep someone awake for 2 weeks straight, they forget how to speak? Did you know that even if your eyes are chemically burnt with household cleaning supplies, it doesn't damage them enough to stop you from crying? Did you know that if you blind someone and tie a piano wire noose around their neck and make them stand on a phone book, they won't try to escape because they don't know how high up they are? Did you know that? Did you? I do now, because that's what I came home to. And then I got to watch the whole process because the motherfucker recorded the whole thing and left me a tape. Like a diary. Like a little love note from one broken person to another. Although, I like to think I'm a little less broken than him, even now. Jenna was a patient of mine. Came in for PTSD after she found her father drowned in a bathtub when he swallowed a bottle of Ambien. I met her the day before I left. I busted her with a condom full of weed saddled up in her womanhood. It was her first day, and I get how scary things can be in a ward, even when you're on a cocktail of anti-anxiety medicine, like she was. I had to take it from her, though. Rules are rules. And as I'm just about to confiscate the dope and just sweep things under the rug, she gets this cutting little smirk and asks me to pay for it. $200! Can you believe that? She was my kind of crazy. The kind you can fall in love with. The kind that wants you to fall in love with them. She was the kind of crazy that was so empty, she would take any scrap from anyone that would give her the time of day, good or bad. She was beautiful and smart, classy despite her trauma, hopeful. Even in the end, she was hopeful. That's what I told the police anyway. I didn't tell them she had a heroin problem, or that her mom was a deadbeat tweaker. I didn't tell them that just before she got admitted into my ward, she had been found in a ditch after she tried to fight some dealer that crossed her on a deal. She told me she did something she had never done before, to get her hit of mule. That's what got her so mad when he didn't deliver. God damn, I should have just let the kid have her weed. It's weed. Doctors can prescribe that shit in most places now. She deserved better than a dank, old government-funded prison cell. Oh, but it's not a cell, they say. It's an assisted living therapy suite. The last time I saw her, Jenna was popping a paper cup full of medication to help with the quickly approaching withdrawal symptoms. And then that monster did that to her! But I get it now. I pissed off the wrong person. I thought the threats were empty trollings of a 13-year-old brat with an iPad. I was wrong. Even though I didn't pull the trigger, I put the bullets in the gun. And now Jenna is dead. I imagine this will probably be my last post, whether I want it to be or not. I get the message, loud and clear. Everything that I have posted here or elsewhere is a story. Not a single word of it is true. Anyone in the medical community would tell you, if the stories in the Ward series were true, that the institution I work at would have been shut down within a couple hours by NAMAS or some other auditing company. It's really difficult to believe that anyone would take this series seriously enough to think of it as fact, instead of the work of tired, tedious fiction that it is. That being said, the following story, just like all the others before it, is entirely fictional. A girl walks in, taken to court over a grisly murder that happened in her house. She spends days in custody, being grilled by interrogators with glossy black boots and brass badges. The girl says she knows absolutely nothing of what is going on with the recent homicide, and that she was away on a trip during the time of the murder. She tells several people the same story, and thinks she has a pretty airtight alibi. She is given a can of soda and a peanut butter sandwich for her troubles, but they do not let her leave. The girl sits in a cold room by herself for several hours, staring into her reflection in a one-way mirror. She thinks that the reflection looks sad. She thinks that the reflection looks innocent. Then she stops thinking and begins to cry. In fact, she is so deeply immersed in her own crying that she doesn't notice another entity enter the room. The other woman is a police officer. The other woman calls herself Cheryl. Cheryl offers the girl a box of tissues and opens up a slim manila folder on the stainless steel table between the two of them. Cheryl runs her fingers through her tightly curled hair and asks if the girl knows a woman named Dana. The girl says, "Yes." Cheryl kindly asks the girl not to pull on her IV. The girl says that it burns. Cheryl doesn't seem to care. "Do you know where Dana is now?" Cheryl asks. The girl says, "No." The girl says that Dana had been gone for a while on an unexpected vacation. The girl feels sick to her stomach and asks to go home. "When did Dana go on vacation?" asked Cheryl. The girl doesn't know. The girl feels like she doesn't know much of anything anymore. The girl just wants to go home, to her cat, to the mattress her parents bought her for her last birthday, to her little houseplants that never seem to have enough water, to that one dent in the wall where she accidentally knocked over a lamp the last time she was drunk with friends, to her own Wi-Fi so she can rant about how shitty her day had been, to her nightstand so she can look at the jar. The girl did not realize she had been speaking out loud. Cheryl asked about the jar. The girl does not answer. Cheryl asked why the jar is so important. The girl does not answer. Cheryl snaps her fingers and a young man enters the room with a large glass jar in his hands. He sets it on the table. The contents slosh inside the transparent container. Cheryl informs the girl that they found the jar at the same location as the murder. Cheryl says words like, "doesn't look good," and "red flags." But the girl is having a hard time concentrating. The room is starting to spin. The girl feels like she might throw up, like she might pass out. The girl hears Cheryl say, "She's had way too much." The girl can't even hold her head up, and her head slams on the table. She does, however, have enough will to keep her eyes open, to stare. She stares at the jar. She stares at the contents of the jar. She stares at the markings burnt into the contents of the jar. She cries. "Does this mean anything to you?" asked Cheryl. The girl nods, and the girl continues to cry softly. "Where did you get this? Your hospital?" Again, she nods. Cheryl is quiet for several minutes. She leaves the room more than once, coming back with a half-empty bottle of water clasped in her hands. There are moments when Cheryl opens her mouth, as if to speak. Her lips part, tongue brushing the roof of her palate, throat constricting, but no words exit her mouth. The man who brought in the jar looks annoyed by this. He helps the girl lift her head.
"Do you want the jar back?"
he whispers. The girl nods and feels warm fingers snake their way across her back, then stop on her breast.
"I can give it back to you."
He smiles, locking the door. And the girl gets her jar back. She feels everything was worth it just to have it back in her arms. The man unlocks the door. Cheryl comes in, screaming. "What the fuck did you do? What the fuck did you do?"
"I got what I wanted,"
he replies flatly.
"She doesn't know anything. Just put it down as a fake. Some movie prop she picked up at a roadshow or something."
No one is going to believe that this is a coincidence.
"Coincidences happen all the time. That's why they are called coincidences."
"Fuck you, Magus." He laughs.
"Already taken care of."
He exits. Cheryl is speechless again. Cheryl lets the girl leave with her jar. A taxi takes the girl home, and the girl immediately descends into her basement. She places the jar on the floor, unscrews the lid, pulls out the hand, and begins to kiss it. She wants so bad to understand. The girl falls asleep on the concrete foundation below her house, the hand clutched against her sweating chest. She dreams about an ocean, about stars, about something moving across a green sky above. She hears a song ringing across the cosmos, and it scrawls itself across the eons of pitch-painted expanses. She dreams about sand and dunes of silver dust. She sees 4 explorers delving into a pit with torches and davy lamps. They stumble down thousands of steps, barely managing to stave off the consuming darkness with their meager means of illumination. They march, march, march until their lamps flicker and die, and then they march some more. Their hands grope against carefully carved stones to guide their way. They speak to each other with increasing anxiety, until they find it. It's beautiful. It's so unspeakably beautiful. And it knows the song of eons. It knows the symphony written in the stars. When I wake up, I retrieve my father's wood-burning tools. I sit down at my laptop and tell the story of a girl and a jar. Then, I send it off, into the depths of the internet with little concern of who does or does not read it. Because I understand now. I have heard the song, but I fear forgetting it more than any other terror this world has conjured. I am part of the song, and the song will soon be a part of me. This, of course, is all just a story, though. Most of us amble through our day in a vacuum, eyes on our feet, ears caked with a lifetime worth of useless diversion. We are, as it were, husks of ourselves. We are masks of our own mask. We eat, we breathe, we fuck, then subsequently, we create another generation deliberated to do the same. I don't blame anyone. I don't think any less of those who find it easier to manufacture the same reality that their forefathers did, but I am not that person. Not anymore. Regardless of how you consume the following information, know this: I am already dead by now. That is what most of you will believe. That is what my family and friends will believe, because that is all they and you have ever truly known. The moment we are spawned into this illusion is the same moment that we begin to deconstruct it. Life is destruction, and you wouldn't believe me even if I tried to explain that it doesn't end there. It doesn't, but for your quality of sleep and peace of mind, know that I am dead. Don't just think it or feel it, know it. Regardless, I have been absent for a matter of months, and those who concern themselves with my general well-being deserve to know what has led to this final, inglorious message. Some things you will not understand. After Dana died, I spent most of my time in my basement listening for the next sideral symphony to bleed from the sky and soak into my brain. I cut and burnt myself in identical fashion to the hand that I once imprisoned in the jar. I ate paper towels and torn strips of cloth to fill my stomach when I got hungry. Once I had begun transcribing, transferring the message onto myself for safekeeping, I realized how much time I had been buying and how little of that currency I had left. Eventually, I knew enough to scribe without the hand, and I turned to consuming once it had worn out its usefulness. I don't remember doing this per se, but I can feel it inside me. I can feel it articulate within the supple, fat spider legs. It took me 2 weeks to finish. Exhausted, fatigued, and so close to transcendence, I took the hacksaw from the utility closet and removed my piece of the relay, a baton. I sealed off the bleeding by holding my arm on the range in the kitchen. Don't worry, Mother. I didn't feel anything. The song was getting louder, and she said that she would be needing me soon. That was enough to distract me from the pain, from the smell of cooked flesh, the nervous excitement of my fast-approaching voyage, and, with any trip, there were formalities that needed to be attended to. I went to Cherokee Park in the Art District in Louisville, dug a shallow hole under an oak tree near a picnic area, and buried my hand there. Next, I went back home. My phone had 32 missed calls, 22 voicemails, and 60 texts. I only remember reading one. It was from someone special. If you don't call me back in the next 24 hours, I'm calling the cops. The text read. I checked the time. I had 8 hours to go. I had plenty of time. Retrieving a utility knife from the block in the kitchen, I walked over to the neighbor's house. It was 11:45 p.m. at that point. Rounding the back of the brick house of the Gaylors, I spied that they had left the ground floor window ajar. I opened it, slithered inside, and waited for instructions. I stood there in the middle of the family's hallway, relentlessly sweating from the night's wet heat. She saw my patience. She embraced me in song and told me what to do next. Behind the second door on the right slept a boy. I don't know his name. He was maybe 19, 21 at most. He slept facing the wall, one arm cocked under his pillow. In a different world, he would have rolled through a night's sleep. He would have woke up to the sound of a phone alarm or maybe a text message, and he would have continued living day after tedious day. In a different world, I wouldn't have had to kill him. One quick jab to the neck, a hand over the mouth, and a patient smile was all it took. I bit out his tongue and chewed hard. I could feel it turn to ash between my teeth, and I swallowed the pulpy gristle as best as I could, savoring the inky metallic taste. I could feel her there, my mouth full of dust. That is when I learned to speak. Next were the twins. I do know their names, Lane and Lily. Their names were delicately scribed in puffy paint along the topmost rail of their respective cribs. I hefted them both out, careful not to rouse them from their slumber. I needed them to be quiet for a while. I needed them fresh. They were good kids, not even making a single grunt or chirp the whole time. I was exiting through the window when the boy, Lane, slipped from my arms. He fell and landed on his head, and he still resolved not to make a sound. He fidgeted a lot less after that, but he was still alive. I checked. I walked 4 miles with those babies in my arms, heading to where it all began. I felt so stupid. I should have seen the signs. All of those patients that I thought needed help were, in reality, trying to help me, trying to get me to see the world beyond the world. I remember the moon being so bright that night, full and mammillary. It felt like her eye was so close, watching me in serene contemplation. The next part was hard. Getting into the asylum was a feat I knew was beyond me, but she had paved a way. There was a break in the fence on the north face of the property, and I managed to belly crawl my way through, pushing the agitated babies in front of me as I went. The girl began to whimper, on the verge of a full-on fit, so I took off my sock and gagged her as best I could. We were so close, and I was sure that they would know, that they did understand. I got in through a back door that some of the nurses keep propped open when they smoke. From there, it was a quick walk to the second floor. The air felt so caustic there, like tear gas. The fluorescent lights above me ticked away with my heart, counting the measure of the glorious symphony around, the symphony of the stars. God, I wish you could hear it. Before I knew it, I was in room 202. I was in the womb. I could hear the song of the midwife gurgling through the empty chamber. Amniotic bliss filled my dusty mouth, her granular blood pumping into me. The twins passed on before me, straightening the way even though the stars were right. She told me the path straightened. It opened and she took me into her arms. These were the last words my sister ever spoke. She left a recording on her phone detailing everything. I found it and immediately called the police. Something was off though. They didn't seem to care. I told them that I thought she might be in the hospital up the street, but I never mentioned the phone. I don't know why, but I'm glad that I didn't. I was racked with grief all that night and I still can't sleep. Stranger yet, the message was timestamped at 11 p.m. on the dot of that night. Almost a full hour before, well, before it all started, I guess. 2 days later, I went to the police station to see if they had any clue what was going on. You know what they told me? Nothing. Not that they hadn't found anything. They told me that they had no record of anything at all. Not my call, not the cursory investigation, nothing. I was escorted out and I rushed to her house. It was spotless and empty as a tomb. Nothing. The message was the only thing to go on, so I went to the park she had mentioned and I found the tree. There I found no jar, no hand. I found a fresh hole in the earth, full of dust. More nothing. Then I went to the hospital. I opened the set of double doors into the lobby and asked for her. The clerk said that not only did she not know her, but they have no records of anyone by her name working at that ward. I lost my temper. She said to calm down, but I stormed my way deeper into the asylum, door after door. Not her, not her, not her. I ran up a flight of steps, security behind me. Then I felt a pain in my gut. The first door on the right, 202. She's in there now, under the name Jordan Ham. After that day, I was asked to never return to the ward, but I can do this. I can do one last thing. I can finish her story, because I can hear it now. I would be willing to bet that some of you can too. Right now.